Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session. I'm so happy to see all your faces. Hello, Miss Kristen. Hello, Miss Latoya. Hi, Miss Norlise. And Miss Samantha, I said hello to you earlier, but I don't think your audio had connected yet. I'm so happy to see you guys. Hello, Miss Deborah. Look at this group. All right, so today's session, we are going to be working. We really tried to target this session and our next Tuesday session. Hi, Miss Deborah.
Hi, I'm sorry I couldn't get it off of mute.
Oh, no worries.
How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing great, doing great.
Great. So the session for today, and then the session that we have in 2 weeks on the 27th, we really tried to tailor these trainings for our family childcare providers, but the content is still applicable to all other childcare settings. So we are so happy that you guys are all here today. And I do hope that you get something out of today's session. So we are going to be working on how to and working on lesson planning for birth to 5. So today's session, and just as a note as we get started here, we are not curriculum specialists. We are here today to provide information about best practices, support, and practices around supporting lesson planning. So our agenda for today, we are going to define lesson planning. We are going to share successes and challenges. Depending on how big our group gets, we might just do it as one group together, or if we end up having everybody join that was registered for today, then we'll split up into 2 breakout rooms. We'll see how many more people we get in here today. And then we're going to explore some strategies for lesson planning and then discuss and develop some practice lesson planning with you all. So we will go through introductions real quick, just since we do have a smaller group. If anybody wants to introduce themselves, we'll go ahead and do that in one moment. Well, then we'll go over some information on strategies, and then we'll have an opportunity for a little bit of lesson planning practice. Everybody has their own kind of lesson plan template, and that is perfectly okay. Use what you have, and we're just going to go through structure and best practices with them. So, quick introductions. My name is Lexi Langiri. I am your trainer for today. I am also the Quality Initiatives and Professional Development Manager here at the Early Learning Coalition. We do have about 7 other friends on the call with us so far today. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and introduce themselves, your name, what age group you work with, maybe what center you work with?
I can go first.
Okay, go ahead, Kristen.
I'm Kristen. I work for ODB Kids. I'm the assistant director here, so I help with all age groups when needed. So I work with 6 weeks all the way up to 5 years old.
Hello, Kristen. We are so happy to have you. Ms. Deborah, I saw you unmuted as well. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, I'm Debbie Danzy. I own Little Debbie's Childcare. I work with all ages from also newborn to at least 5 or 6. And I'm happy to have my job.
And we are so happy to have you with us today. Thank you. Anybody else would like to go? Go ahead, Latoya. So I saw she unmuted. We'll see if she's able to, if we can hear her.
Okay, I go.
Go ahead.
My name is Noralis Cruz. I work for UF Early Childhood Collaboratory right here in Legales. And I work with 1-year-old.
So happy to see you on a call again, Norlise.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. It's always very helpful.
I'm glad to hear that. You want to go ahead, Miss Latoya? Okay. I saw Miss Casey dropped in the chat box. She's in nap time right now. And her name is Casey. She's the VPK lead at St. Anne's Early Learning Center. Anybody else want to do an introduction?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, my name is Latoya. I work for ODB. I'm the assistant director at the Child Center.
We are so excited to have you today, Miss Latoya.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Okay, awesome. We are so happy to have everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here. So we're going to go ahead and start with our training content. So we are going to define lesson planning, and we're going to do that with a couple of different things to align today's training with. So there are a set of standards implemented by the Division of Early Learning. And we're going to go through kind of how to navigate the early learning standards. The website is super easy, and we'll go through how to navigate that later on in today's training. So we are going to make sure that everything that we're teaching is centered around those early learning standards. We're also going to align this with CLASS. So CLASS is the observation tool used for program assessments to look at high quality teacher-child interactions and also child-to-child interactions. And so lesson planning aligns with CLASS for a couple different reasons. With our infant group, this helps support that facilitated exploration by making sure we're being involved and we're expanding on the infant's experiences. With toddlers, this is going to support facilitation of learning and development, making sure we are actively facilitating activities, making sure we're asking those right questions to expand on their cognitive skills, and then making sure we have the children's active engagement. With pre-K, this is going to enforce the productivity, which is maximizing learning time, making sure we're prepared for the day, making sure we have those instructional learning formats. So having that effective facilitation, making sure that we have a variety of modalities and materials. When we talk about modalities, that's how children learn, through hearing, through vision, through hands-on. It's also going to give us some support around making sure that we have really clear learning objectives. We're not just doing an activity to do it, we're doing it with purpose, with a learning objective in mind. And then it's also going to support that concept development. So those analysis and reasoning skills that we need to implement, as well as integration with previous concepts and connecting what we're learning to the children's real world experiences. So not just in the classroom, but how do we expand that out of the classroom with their families and in different community activities. So we're going to first define a lesson plan. And so we found this definition, which was really super helpful, from Singapore Management University. And so they define lesson planning as an instructor's roadmap of what students need to learn and how it will be done effectively during the class time. So we've got a lot of great key words going on there: roadmap, making sure we have what they're learning, and then how are we going to get it done effectively? Because we all know there's lots of things that we want to teach, but we may not always have the whole day to do so. So lesson planning is going to help us kind of create the structure to get there. And so we ask ourselves, why should we lesson plan? Not just because it's required, but it's also going to benefit the children by having a very successful organization of time. It's also going to help us intentionally apply those early learning standards that we were talking about just a second ago. It's going to help create communication and partnering with our co-teachers, our assistant teachers, and that intentional lesson planning is going to help relieve stress to help the teachers be prepared to deliver those high quality instruction. And then it's also going to help us with accommodating students' needs and learning styles. So, do some of our students really like to hear things? Do they like to be more hands-on? Do we have a student with special needs that we need to make accommodations for with an activity? Do we have an English language learner who is still learning English? And do we need to make some translation adjustments to our lesson plan to make sure that they're getting the most out of what we're teaching as well? So by having that lesson plan, we get to think through those things ahead of time instead of kind of trying to scramble and make it happen on a whim. So next, we're going to be sharing some best practices when it comes to lesson planning. However, it's important to remember that your early childhood education site may have other requirements when it comes to your lesson planning. And so your site requirements should be followed. Today's training is really going to be about those best practices. When we think about how often we lesson plan, long answer short, always. We're going to be lesson planning always. And we want to break that down a little bit further though. So we want to lesson plan yearly. So some curriculums have themes that run throughout the year to help us plan the layout of our instruction. It's really valuable to also reflect at the end or at the beginning of each year to determine what went well and what might need to be adjusted for the year to come. We're also going to lesson plan monthly. This is going to outline our general flow on a monthly basis to help keep us focused on those standards and the curriculum that needs to be taught without all the details. This will also allow us time to purchase any materials that we might need for an activity. Next, we're going to plan weekly. Planning on a weekly basis is important to post the learning objectives for our families to see and to allow for more effective communication with our co-teachers or our assistant teachers. And then finally, we're going to also lesson plan daily. And so daily lesson planning allows us to prepare the materials needed for that day's activity or make adjustments as needed for the students. So when we are lesson planning, we want to think through what do we need to include in a lesson plan. We want to make sure that our lesson plan and the activities in that lesson plan are tied to the early learning standards, that we have a very specific time allotted for the activity, that we have all the materials needed for the activity, and adaptations that might be needed for students are already pre-planned. Those students who might have disabilities or who are English language learners. With the objectives of a lesson plan, we want to also plan how we're going to evaluate the students after the lesson to make sure that they learned what we anticipated. So give yourself time to lesson plan. Some providers do give teachers designated time while others do not. However, try not to rush through the process so that you can create very effective, inclusive lesson plans every time. A couple of other items. So when we're lesson planning, especially in Florida, especially over the summer, we want to make sure we have rainy day activities planned. And so these are going to be our alternatives to that outside play. Play is a very important part of learning for children birth to 5. It's also important to remember that what is developmentally appropriate for infants is not developmentally appropriate for VPK students and vice versa. When we're considering the time that we're allotting for teacher-directed activities, such as circle time or a structured game, teacher-directed activities for infants and toddlers should not last longer than 10 to 15 minutes max. That's a tough one because that means that we have to transition and move through a lot of different things throughout the day. But the attention span and the learning span of a child that young really hits around that 10 to 15-minute marker. For preschool age children, so this is about 3, 4, and 5, this can be up to 15 to 20 minutes max. So we want to try and keep our lesson plans within this timeline as much as possible. When it comes to making sure that we're providing developmentally appropriate activities for infants, this might look like book reading, talking, blocks, stacking rings, crawling, walking, or singing. A lot of their day is spent in diaper changing, feeding, and napping. For toddlers, developmentally appropriate activities would include book reading, art activities, blocks, and dramatic play. And then for preschoolers, math, reading, writing, songs, games, and dramatic play. So what I would like to do is we are going to kind of go into our own breakout rooms. It looks like we can do some smaller groups here. Have some group discussions on what your current successes and challenges are around lesson planning. We'll do this breakout room for about 5 minutes. Also consider in this 5 minutes while we're doing this breakout room, if you have a blank copy of your lesson planning template readily available for you, we will be pulling those out towards the end. So at some point between now and the end, try and acquire a blank copy of your lesson plan template. So quick reiteration, we're going into breakout rooms to discuss current successes and challenges around lesson planning. Does anybody have any questions before we go into our groups? Okay, I didn't see anybody unmute. I don't see anything in the chat box. So we'll go into breakout rooms for about 5 minutes to discuss the successes and challenges of lesson planning. And then we'll come back here and share the general discussion of the room. All right, I'll see you guys back here in about 5 minutes. Sorry, guys. Sounds like we got cut off. 5 minutes is never long enough. But I know my group was talking about their successes and challenges with different kinds of curriculum. Some of them are harder to follow than others, and it sounds like Funny Dapper is one that it seems to be really easy to follow, even with different age groups, like in a family childcare home. And yeah, so that was our main group discussion. Miss Shy, how about you guys? You're still muted, Miss Shy.
Sorry. Thanks, Lexi. Yeah, we had a really good discussion. Miss Norlise shared with us that she's with the toddlers, so the 1-year-olds, and she's come to learn that less is more when making or creating the lesson plans. She realized that children can learn and play at the same time, and really notices how dramatic play really is helpful with trying to keep the children engaged. And she's also learned to relate things to children's lives, and that also helps cut back on challenging behaviors and helps with keeping the children engaged. So we had a pretty good discussion.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you all for sharing your experiences. It's always lovely to hear. It's different people and different sites. All right, so we're gonna go through some strategies for lesson planning. So think about what you do currently. What are some strategies you currently use when you're creating lesson plans? What do you do that you feel is most important when creating lesson plans? So are the children engaged, or do the children get the concept that you're trying to teach them? And then think also about, how do you know the lesson plan was effective? So are we looking for child engagement? Are we looking for children to demonstrate that they have retained the information? Are we looking for continued discussion among children after the lesson plan has taken place? So keep those 3 questions in mind as we go through these next couple slides on best practices. So we want to first start with the early learning teaching standards and think through how to incorporate those standards with center curriculum. So the Florida Early Learning Developmental Standards can be taught in various ways across the day's activities and routines. The website is listed right here. I'm also going to drop it in the chat box. That way you guys have it. And so this website provides teachers with access to all of the standards, early learning standards for children birth to 5. And so these are a set of standards and benchmarks that reflect the knowledge and skills that a child has on a developmental progression. And this is going to show what they should know and what they should be able to do at a specific age-related time frame. These standards include the concepts of play, patterns, cause and effect, and communication. And we know that when they are incorporated into daily activities, these concepts will support educators in providing meaningful learning experiences for children. So let me pull this over. This is the website. The Division of Early Learning is the governing kind of head of early childhood education. They create the standards and the expectations for all of early childhood programs in Florida. And so on the website looks like this at the beginning. So if we go to standards, it'll open this up. And this is what it looks like when you first begin. And so we have 8 domains that we can look at when we think about standards. So physical development approaches to learning, social emotional development, language and literacy, mathematical thinking, scientific inquiry, social studies, and creative expression through the arts. So just for the purpose of today, we're going to choose mathematical thinking. This can also then be broken down even further by age groups. So for the purpose of today, we're going to go with 2 to 3 years old. And this will populate all of the components that a 2 to 3-year-old should be able to understand in that time frame of their development. So we look at number sense, numbers and operations, patterns, geometry, spatial relations, and then measurement and data. So for the purpose of today, we're going to look at number sense. And so if we click on the component, it breaks it down even further. So the first thing that we would want to make sure this age group can do is immediately recognize, without counting, up to 2 objects. So this might be that they understand the number 1 and or the number 2. So they can recognize up to 2 objects. And then they're going to begin to count groups of 1 to 5 objects in daily routines. Okay, so this is pretty easy. We can do this in a transition. But we have to be very intentional about it. We have to plan it, and we have to prepare for it. Let's say we want to do, how are we going to do geometry with 2 to 3 year olds? Well, geometry is going to look like matching basic shapes non-verbally. So how can they match a circle to a circle? How can they match a square to a square? That's what geometry looks like for 2 to 3 year olds. Okay, so once we know what the topic or objective that we want to teach around, we can review the standards and make sure that we're creating ways to incorporate them into the lesson plan. These standards have been created as such so that each part of a child's early development is taken into consideration, and it progressively builds as they get older and older. There has been, there has been some discussion at the school board of Alachua County about what does it look like for VPK students to be kindergarten ready. And it comes down to these standards. These standards, as they're currently outlined, let's say we want to go forward to kindergarten, mathematical thinking, number sense. These 7 parts of the number sense component, if a child has all 7 of these parts as they're leaving VPK and moving into kindergarten, along with the other components and the other standards, they are going to be VPK ready, or they are going to be kindergarten ready. So that transition to kindergarten is going to go a lot smoother. They're going to be more prepared. They're going to have all the information that they need to be successful in kindergarten. So it doesn't just start in VPK, that this starts at 0 years old, which is why we really want to emphasize the importance of using these early learning teaching standards. Does anybody have any questions about the website or how to navigate the website? Or anything about the standards themselves? Okay. So next, this is the same part. We just did a screenshot. That's the website that we looked at with the 8 domains that we can look for developmental standards. So we went through that. We chose the 2 to 3 year old age group, and then we chose number sense, and we were able to break down number sense into those 2 other items. So before we go into our next slide, when we create an effective lesson plan, we want to use strategies that support us in helping our students gain understanding of new concepts and help guide them towards developing new skills. We also want to make sure to motivate them to learn, so it's important to have lessons that are engaging and interesting to children. So there's 3 components in an effective lesson plan. We're going to have first our objectives. These are the things that we want our students to learn. We're not just handing them a piece of paper and some markers and say draw. We have an actual purpose and an end goal of why we are doing what we're doing in the lesson plan itself. So objectives determine the first step in creating an effective lesson plan. This is going to help us determine the kinds of teaching and learning activities that we'll use in the classroom. So some questions we might ask to help specify those objectives are going to include, what is the topic of the lesson? What do I want students to learn? What do I want them to understand and be able to do at the end of class? And then finally, what do I want them to take away from this particular lesson? So for example, if we are counting ladybugs, then the purpose of that particular lesson is they're practicing their counting. Okay. Our next strategy for lesson planning, we want to make sure we have an introduction. So this is going to help us determine how to introduce the new skill or the new concept that we're talking about. So how will I check? We're going to think through, how will I check through whether my students know anything about the topic, or do they already have some previous knowledge that's going to be easy to work into the topic? So we might ask a question like, how many of you have heard of a ladybug? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, it's a quick question and answer to give you some idea of where your students currently are with their knowledge base. We also want to think through, what are some commonly held ideas or misconceptions about this topic that children might be familiar with or might not be familiar with. So we might create a list of questions to ask the children about the topic. How many legs does a ladybug have? How many spots does a ladybug have? We will also consider what we're going to do to introduce the topic. So maybe we might introduce the topic by reading a book on the topic. We might pass around pictures on the topic, or we might have a group discussion. Our third strategy on an effective lesson plan is we want to have those learning activities. So after we've decided how we're going to introduce the topic to the children, our next strategy is going to be to prepare several different ways for children to explore. And this might include some real life examples, some analogies, or maybe even some visuals to sustain the attention and engagement of the students and appeals to their different learning styles. So we might start the lesson plan with circle time. This would be a whole group activity where we could introduce the topic at the time. And then we might move into an art project where we have them paint or draw or mold ladybugs. That's going to help them use their imagination and creativity with self-expression, using those open-ended art experiences with intention. We might also go to the library that day. So maybe we encourage them to find various books about ladybugs. With math, we could incorporate ladybugs by counting spots or counting legs. And then for science, to implement the ladybugs with science, we might use a scale to weigh different bugs and different insects, and then make comparison pictures of ladybugs and use some magnifying glasses to search around outside for insects. Our final component with strategies on lesson planning is we want to evaluate. So now that we've explained the topic and we've illustrated it with an activity, we are going to want to check to make sure that the students understand what we just taught them. So how will we know that the students have grasped the concept? So we can ask questions like, what questions will I ask for students to check for understanding? Such as, what did we learn about today? Or what will I have students do to demonstrate that they're understanding? So we may ask them a question such as, what can you tell me about ladybugs? And then finally, thinking about the learning objectives, what activity can I have students do to check whether or not it's been accomplished? So we might have the children draw about what they learned. Again, we want to make sure it's developmentally appropriate, infants cannot draw about ladybugs, but maybe we can give them a stuffed ladybug to look at and to play with. So just keep in mind that when we are doing these objectives, introductions, activities, and the evaluation process, it is very important to keep their developmental appropriateness at the forefront of your brain. Okay, what I would like to do, well, let me ask a question first. Was anybody able to get a blank copy of their lesson plan template yet? You can unmute and tell me, or yes or no in the chat box.
So Funny Duffer doesn't really provide a blank template for us to pull. I can just try to take one off and like erase everything, but other than that, we don't use templates.
Okay.
They have it all planned out for you, and you just pick and choose actually which lesson you want to use.
All right.
Uh,
Okay, so sounds like Funny Dapper does all the work for you.
It really does. It tells you what type of whatever you need for the lesson, paper, glue. It has a blueprint of everything.
Okay.
Yeah, so usually Funny Dapper has like the steps, it has the standards, the materials,
The material.
does all of that for you, and it's usually done by like our education department.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for letting me know. Was anybody else able to find a blank lesson plan template? Okay, so what we'll do then is, let me get my thing back open. What we'll do then is we'll keep the domains here on the screen. And let's use the example of ladybugs. Let's just pretend this week's topic is going to be about ladybugs. So if we were lesson planning, what might be a way that we incorporate language and literacy with ladybugs?
I mean, we can read the book, The Grumpy Ladybug.
Love that book. And then we're going to tie that same book in with social emotional development. We've got a Grumpy Ladybug book for language and literacy. Let's tie that into social emotional development and talking about feelings such as grumpy.
So we can do like an emotional chart or like little emotional puppets and talk about like having the kids make those facial expressions or show what it feels like to be grumpy or be sad or happy.
Yep. Perfect. Great example, Kristen.
You can also include songs and songs and poems about Ladybug.
Yep, and that's going to hit on our approaches to learning domain. Approaches to learning looks at the different ways that children, learn different things. How about scientific inquiry? How can we use science for ladybugs?
Encourage the kids to make a ladybug.
Yeah, and that would tie into creative expression through the arts. Okay, so if we decided scientific inquiry, let me get this to go away. We're just going to say 4 to 5 years old. And we've got life science for ladybugs. It talks about characteristics of different plants and animals, including their physical bodies, like camouflage, body covering. So we can have a discussion about those kinds of things with ladybugs, similarities and differences with ladybugs. life cycles of ladybugs, distinguish between maybe a living ladybug versus a stuffed ladybug. So living versus non-living things. And then observe that living things differ with regard to their needs and habitats. So finding out, what does ladybug eat? Where does she live? How does she get around? And then if we decide to do, here we go. Creative arts, creative expression through the arts. We might have songs about ladybugs, or maybe even they create their own song. Movement. So it continues to engage individuals in group movement to express thoughts, observations, imagination, feelings, experiences, knowledge. So maybe how does a ladybug move? How can you show me how a ladybug might move? There's lots of ways to incorporate one topic, even as amazing as ladybugs, across all of the developmental domains. And so no matter what your lesson plan looks like, no matter if you have one that's already created for you or you create your own from scratch, it's really going to be important that we make sure that we reference these standards on a regular basis to make sure that we have a clear understanding in mind of what our students are going to be learning and how we're going to get them to learn that way. And if we use all of these domains in all of our lesson plans, or even in all of our themes, maybe we don't hit on every single day social studies, but if we hit on social studies, once or a couple times a week, we're still incorporating it. If we're following these developmental standards, we're going to be creating rich, high quality interactions with our students and giving them an opportunity to learn that topic or learn that theme of that week through many different ways to accommodate for the different ways that we all learn. The way that I learn is not the same as the way Miss Shy learns or Miss Deborah learns, and that's okay. But we are all still should be able to have that information and have that education given to us. All right. Does anybody have any questions about lesson planning or how to use the standards for lesson planning? Okay, don't see anything in the chat box. I don't see anybody unmuting, so we'll keep going. We do have, actually, we don't have the resources at the moment. You'll be receiving the follow-up email, which will include the PowerPoint as well as the link to the developmental standards. I encourage you to look through those standards if you have, when you have a moment. So what I would like to do is we're going to take about 3 minutes to go back into our breakout rooms. And we're going to do one of two things. We're going to do either think about something that you learned today and how you're going to implement it in your classroom or in your center if you're a director. Or if you learned something in today's session that you already currently do, but want to reinforce that as a discussion topic. So either something that you learned today that you're going to implement or something that you learned today that you're going to reinforce. Does anybody have any questions before we go into breakout rooms? Okay. I will see you guys back here in about 3 minutes. I was going on a soapbox about teacher directed time limits. I'm gonna finish real quick. Miss Deborah was just saying, like, you'll get more from the children if you have like 2 smaller 15-minute activities versus one 30-minute activity. And I think you'll find some really great progress that way. All right, so we had some great ideas and great discussions in our group. And how'd your group go, Mishai?
It went pretty good. Miss Norley shared that she'd probably like to work with her children like one standard at a time. I share with her how one activity can cover so many different standards, but I think she feels it'll be more helpful to her, like focusing on the one standard each week or each day with the lesson plan, and then reevaluating at the end of the week to see which children were able to get it, because some children may be a little bit more advanced than other children. But I thought that that was a really good idea, with kind of keeping note of that and trying to meet the children where they are. So we had a pretty good discussion.
Awesome. All right, so let's finish ourselves up. I'm looking forward to hearing all the amazing ways you guys are going to use this in your classroom and in your centers. All right, so wrap up for today. We were able to define a lesson plan as the instructor's roadmap of what students need to learn and how it would be done effectively during class time. We discussed why it was important, because it organizes time, it applies those learning standards, and it accommodates the different children's needs. We discussed some strategies for creating inclusive lesson plans, and then we all discussed next steps and thinking about how we're going to put those into action. So this is going to wrap up our session today on lesson planning for birth to 5. This is our contact information. This is the references that we used in today's training as far as content was concerned. Mishai is going to drop the evaluation in the chat box for us, and that is how you get your in-service certificate for today's training. If for some reason, let me stop sharing. If for some reason you don't get your certificate automatically in your email, please either shoot me or Mishai an email. We had a weird thing happen recently with our process that this will be the first time with a training itself that we'll be able to make sure that the certificates are or are not auto-populating as we intended them to be. So if you don't receive it, just shoot an email to either one of us and we'll get that taken care of for you. That is going to end our session for today. I'm going to stop our recording.